In terms of the great game that you describe us as turning our backs on now, you posit the argument that China will end up filling this vacuum and will be dragged back into a new superpower competition with China in the Middle East. I thought that was puzzling when I read it, because my sense from several conversations with the Chinese is that they see this place as just a swamp, that they would much rather that we took care of it, but and they could free ride. But I don't see them as eager to jump in by any means. What I see is, and this is where I'd like you to comment, is what I see is a disintegration into a series of schisms, one of which you have the patent on, right, which is the Sunni-Shia schism that is clearly developing in Syria and has the potential to spread across the region from there. And so rather than a new great power competition there, aren't we really going to see just a kind of descent into chaos, which will in the end create this kind of Al-Qaeda resurgence that we're seeing now in Syria? And that's what we have to be worried about.
Well, my sense is not that the Chinese are gunning to replace us, but for the Chinese, the Middle East is a rising strategic concern. For some of it is reasons that are inevitable and unavoidable to them. They need the energy, and the energy comes from Central Asia, it comes from the Persian Gulf, and also the routes to avoid the Straits of Malacca, which, given now the much more emphasis we're putting on South China Sea, and all of it involves the Middle East. So if you look at the patterns of their investment in pipelines, port building, railway building, sovereign fund investment, so it's all directed at building infrastructure to get commodities and minerals and oil and gas out of the Middle East into China, and also to some extent market development. The Chinese have not been as squeamish as we have been in chaotic places. They are heavily invested in the consumer market in Pakistan, for instance, as are all other Asian countries too. So they calculate the country is a chaos. There's no electricity. There's a lot of terrorism, but there's still a 30 million healthy middle class market that you can sell plenty of things to. The same then can be said about other places in the Middle East, and they're looking. And the other issue for them is geostrategic, which is the belt around them from Central Asia to Pakistan matters to the stability of Western China. And as more and more of the population in industrial centers are moving west, that's becoming more critical. So what the Chinese, the Pakistanis, and the Iranians and the Russians all have in common in terms of strategic view is no United States on your borders. The Chinese also think that it's much better for the U.S. not to be in Afghanistan, not to be in Pakistan, and not to be in Kyrgyzstan, because ultimately it will infuse China with a separatist democratic bug. Now, it's not that the Chinese are egging to come in, but the point is that I'm making is that it's a mistake to think that the great game with China, which is actually the way the administration is seeing this happening, is going to only happen in the Asia Pacific. So our conception of Asia is skewed, thinking that it's only there, whereas the Chinese are looking at a bigger playing field, which is Africa, Middle East, and for them, the Middle East has strategic value. For instance, if your objective is global containment of China, does it make sense for you not to have a footprint in Afghanistan and particularly in Pakistan, or to be giving the message to Persian Gulf monarchies that we're out of here, you're on your own? So, where would they look ultimately in terms of investing their future on? So I agree. I don't think the Chinese are eager to get in the middle of the Arab-Israeli issue or into the middle of the sectarian war. And if really the Middle East explodes in a big way, I'm sure they will recalibrate the degree of interest they have. But I think the cavalier way we're washing our hands of the Middle East, and then saying we're doing so in order to focus on China, it's a faulty assumption that this really is the best way of contending with where the Chinese at least view of its power play in Asia is going.